Morning on Channels Television. Today on the program, we're looking at emotional health and stress management in terms of how we can manage it and ensure that productivity output of workers, employees, staff, whichever name you'd like to call it, is better improved in the workplace, because we know that we face a lot of stress. And as I said earlier when I started the program, there's positive stress and there's negative stress. I'm going to be having this conversation with an occupational mental health consultant, Dr. Otefe Edegbi. Dr. Edegbi, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be on your show.
So let's start with that rather interesting part where we hear a lot about stress, the result of any emotional, physical, or social change. You know, we always definitely respond either negatively or positively to it. And as I said, there's positive stress and there's negative stress. But is there any such thing as positive stress?
Yeah, well, there is. Basically, when you use the medical term for it, you call it eustress. And then when you talk about negative stress, we call it distress, you know. But stress, basically, it's an adverse reaction to an overwhelming pressure. Okay, so sometimes pressures are good, you know, and it pushes you to do even better. You know, like someone says, you don't create a world record running alone. You know, you need other people to run along with you to create a world record. So sometimes stress can be good, and it's referred to eustress when it's good.
Okay, so in terms of how we go through stress in the workplace, let's talk about that. Okay. Can there be positive stress in the workplace?
Yeah, there can be. When we talk about deadlines and the fact that sometimes you deal with maybe a difficult boss, it's not always negative. Sometimes in those kind of situations you grow, you get better, you improve. So yes, pressure sometimes is good. In fact, the curve is usually like a curve that goes up. You keep getting better when you are under pressure. Then it gets to the point where you just start declining, and you know your productivity is low. You're no longer as effective as you used to be. You know, the word stress, you have to tag that word when it is excessive. You know, not just pressure, but when pressure becomes excessive.
But that's just the thing. Not a lot of people understand when stress becomes excessive, because you're looking at yourself that you're in you are in an industry that is eat or be eaten. And so the organization always has to ensure that they're on the fast part. They're thinking ahead of every other person, coming out with innovative ideas, coming out with products to make sure that their clients and customers are happy. And in doing that, the employees are constantly under stress. So at what point do you begin to feel that this is constructive and this is destructive?
Well, it starts out first by being able to identify that I'm being stressed. And most times the problem is that people don't even know when they are being stressed. So all that just keeps going on, and somebody says, deal with it, you know, and doesn't know that at that point, it's not a function of just deal with it. This person is stressed, you know. So it starts out first by being able to identify it. You know, the popular saying that when you are able to know what your problem is, then the problem is half solved.
So identifying those stressors, let's call them that. How can we identify those stressors? Because you see, we're all different individuals. We have different ways we handle issues. So what might be stressful for me might not be stressful for Dr. Edegbi.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
How do we begin to identify those stressors?
Now, you talked about, I said identify that you are stressed. Not just that, not just the stressors, but that you are stressed. Because you see, there are two ways to this. You said what could be stressful to you may not be stressful to me. So there's the individual. Stress is sometimes a perception. I perceive that my boss is threatening, because you have a boss. One person doesn't get along well with that boss, but another person thrives in that environment. You just described a wonderful environment. You know, there's constant innovation. Somebody else is doing so well in that environment, and somebody just feels left behind because so much change is going on. And that's one cause of stress in the workplace. A research I did in a big telecommunication company here in Nigeria showed that that particular telecommunication company had experienced several changes. So I was looking at those who had been there that experienced the number of changes, and I was looking at whether the changes had affected them. And my research did show that those who had experienced so much changes were more stressed than those who had experienced less. So it's not just saying, that shows you want to know what are the signs of stress in the individual. Then you also want to look at the risk factors of stress in the workplace.
And definitely all of this always affects productivity output
of
the employee.
Oh, yes, it does.
So apart from the fact that, what you've mentioned,
Yep.
what other causes of stress do we have?
Well, when you look at stress, particularly in the workplace, you can broadly categorize it into the work environment, things in the workplace that will cause stress. Basically when you look at that, you talk about the demand that's being placed on the individual. You talk about also the role of the individual. Sometimes when there's role ambiguity, it causes a form of stress. You don't really know what is expected of you or what you're supposed to do. That also causes a form of stress. Then, like I mentioned earlier, you talk about change. Then also the support the individual receives. Sometimes people are told to do certain things and not given enough support to be able to achieve that thing.
But then you see, sorry to cut you here,
no problem.
a lot of times when you respond to a job advert, the advert usually has, most times, that you should have the ability to work with minimal supervision and under pressure. So if you know that you cannot handle pressure, why work in that particular environment? If you know you can't handle a workplace stress, for instance, or whatever stress you're going to be facing at this particular environment, why work there?
For me, I think at this point I'll just drop in a joke. Nobody sees that and would say, with this present economy, and say the stress of not working is enough to push you to go and look for a job. Whether they say you work under stress or not, I mean, that's you just go there. So, but then I said, first of all, you look at the workplace, then you look at the work-home interface. Sometimes the stress is coming not necessarily from the workplace, but is impacting on the workplace from somewhere else. The environment where you stay, your home, and all that. Then there's finally the person, because you can't take away. Some have argued that is it really the working condition that is causing the stress, or the individual, the perception that the individual has of the environment. You see, like I mentioned before, people work in that same environment, they thrive. Someone else works under that. Because when you talk about stress, you have to be able to match the job with the person. And when there's that imbalance in that connection, then the person is going to, maybe it has to do with his skill or his personality type. Some job require a lot of creativity. So you get somebody that just wants to get into the workplace, gets in there, is doing the job, is good at something, but not necessarily creative in that aspect.
So it also is a responsibility of the employer or management of whichever organization that particular employee works with to ensure that yes, I'm paying you to do your job, although I'm not going to be holding your hand. It's not a crutch I'm running here. I'm here to run a profit business. But I need to have you working at optimal productivity level to ensure that I get the money to be able to pay your salary and also ensure that our customers are fine. So in looking at it, what can management of organizations do to ensure that their employees retain a certain positive stress level?
Okay, I like that question, because when you look at they call the Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, they put a lot of attention into making the workplace as comfortable as possible. You are not there to run a crutch, yes, we know that, but the truth is this, that every tool used in the workplace is as good as the person using the tool. Every process in the workplace is as good as the people managing the process. So if the people are not functioning optimally, you can have all the gadgets, you can have all the tools in there, but if the people are stressed, they are not going to give the best. So paying attention to the individuals has a lot of business value for the organization.